panel discussion, a panel session on using inspection data and asset management plans to support preservation decisions. And Michael Brown, if you could moderate that. And our panel members are Robbie Corrala and Cole Stump and myself and Chad Robinson.
Okay, so this is entirely unscripted, but I do believe a couple of you gentlemen may have some short presentations to get us started. I picked on Robbie first. Why don't you go ahead?
Georgia DOT, Robbie Corrala, and I'm the State Bridge Maintenance Engineer. So I just wanted to give you guys a few background about Georgia. We got 14,876 structure. That's both state and local owned. And out of those, we got 1,396 posted bridges and 236 poor bridges. And just separating it from local, we got total 6,824 state-owned bridges and 37 posted bridges and 22 poor bridges. Just a snapshot, we, as a part of our inspection, we use InspectX, and this is a screenshot from that program, and currently, as of a couple hours ago, it says we got 79.7% bridges in good condition based on the bridge count, and 20% in a fair condition, and 0.3% in a poor condition, and just be mindful it's only state-owned bridges, okay? And the numbers are pretty similar when it comes to deck area also, 79% for the good condition, 20.1 for the fair condition, and 0.6 for poor condition. I know, Graham, we may end up having a discussion, So as an annual budget, we have $45 million that is allocated for preservation and rehab work. And the way we are trying to divide it is we put 15 million for state bridge for preservation and rehab and 30 for NHS bridges. And further splitting 33% towards preservation work and 67% towards rehab work. So when we talk about preservation, that includes joint replacement, polymer overlay, joint header repair, bridge painting, and micromilling of asphalt. And a lot of these works, we don't have district doing all this work. We let the project, group a bunch of bridges together and just let it. And as far as the district, they do minor repairs, such as minor header repair, spall repair. Those are the very minor work the district are involved. As far as the bridge rehab work, we put LMC overlay, polymer PPC overlay, all those deck overlay as a bridge rehab projects. Pro slab repair, edge beam replacements, epoxy injection, steel beam repair, anchor bolt replacement, pile encasement, scour, and concrete patching. That are considered to be a rehab bridge work. We don't normally do a superstructure replacement project. We don't do major deck replacement project. That's not as frequently. So we consider this as a minor rehab projects. And just wanted to differentiate that because, $45 million doesn't go that far once you start getting into superstructure rehab and, deck rehab projects. This is our basic guidelines, how we select our bridge preservation. We consider polymer overlay and painting as a preservation work, which this was selected based on environmental requirement, because these are pretty easy project as far as getting certified from environmental. So for these kind of projects, what we do is we select all the bridges with the super and sub rated to be 7 and the deck rated to be 6. So that way, once we do a polymer overlay, we can move these fair bridges to good condition. So that way we're trying to preserve these bridges before they start getting to fair or poor condition, being more proactive than reactive. And also as far as the painting projects, we got a couple criteria. If the paint is, older than 25 years old, and just because it's 25 years old, it doesn't qualify for painting. We check the condition state. We want to make sure that, 80% or less in condition state 1, then those bridges are selected to be a painting project. Rule of thumb, every bridges which were painted 20 years ago, we try to program it because it does take few years. As a part of rehab selection criteria, what we look into is NBI rating. We are still in, I'm pointing out NBI, but we do look at the condition state CS1, 2, 3, but we're not very comfortable using that number. So we are using that to verify our NBI ratings. So the deck, super, and substructure rating 5 or above, and the bridges, all which are designed using HS20, HL95, anything below that, we will program it for replacement. And we're hoping, like, anything H15, we hope that those kind of structure could last for the next 15, 20 years. So eventually, we'll get a program for replacement. We don't think it's a wise decision to spend millions of dollars rehabbing those bridges. And another criteria is bridges that are between 25 to 75 years old. As we all know, like, if the bridge lasted longer than 100 years, that's too much. So after 25, we don't think it's a good idea to invest towards rehab. Same like replacement criteria, there are any rating 4 or below, and other component 5 or 6, which we don't think those are good candidate for preservation or rehab. Also, the bridges that are older than 75 years old, and for some instance, like if there are certain bridges which don't meet this criteria, but district happen to go out there fix it, like hole on the deck multiple times, and we try to bump those kind of bridges, even though they don't meet our basic criteria. We try to put them towards replacement. As far as BRM, like managing like how we want to prioritize the project selection project, we use ESTO BRM, and all these criteria we are building it into ESTO BRM, and we try to run different kind of analysis based on funding criteria. So let's say, okay, well, what if like we do $30 million for preservation work, and we do $50 million for rehab, and we do $200 million for replacement, and we'll run the analysis using BRM. And we just started using that program, so I know there is a lot of work we need to do, but we're building that selection criteria through ESTOware BRM. And also, like, we're not going to take all the recommendation from that. So what our next step is, every 3 months, I'll try to sit down with the state bridge engineer and other district folks, go through the list of bridges, and make a determination which needs to be replaced as far as programming.
Thank you, Robbie. And I'll ask Chad to come and give us a few comments as well.
I'm Chad Robinson. I was formerly the program manager for West Virginia DOT, and last fall, management came to me and asked me to look at a position in the district. So I'm going to kind of give a perspective from a district engineer and how things are done. We have Mont McDonald is doing our BMS, so I'm going to give a little different perspective because I figure everybody's pretty much making some of the same evaluations on how the software runs and some of those decision matrix. So again, we're using the Bentley AssetWise currently. Some of the key components, we're looking at the deck, super, and sub, as well as our culverts, and then the time in the current condition rating is part of that. At this time, my understanding of how we are looking at element level data is we have only officially collected what is required. The districts have had the leeway to do element level on their own. However, 3 years of, hey, you need to do this, we're going to be collecting the data, it's going to have some implications with the BMS when it comes active, but as a program manager didn't send a memo, so the districts didn't do it. So now the current bridge program manager, Stephen Johnson, standing in the back of the room, is about to run. He has to send a memo now to the bridge engineers and say, please put element level data in there if you want more funding. So I think that part of that part of the BMS hasn't been turned on yet in the decision matrix. So that is something that's coming, and it's always, we don't have enough manpower. We never, we need more funding, but we don't want to do more work. So you got to get creative. So out of the BMS run, the central office developed this database, and this is like, I'm going to go into each of the different sections and kind of show you a little bit of what they gave us. But they developed this database for us to look at and vet out what the BMS outrun was. So initially, when it ran, one of the first few runs, it kicked out a lot of overlay projects, and they were trying to figure out, why is it kicking out overlay. And what I understood was it was the cost per square foot of deck, unit cost that they were putting into the program was causing it to kick that out. So once they got into it a little deeper and tweaked the numbers, it started giving out different treatments. So this is what the left side of what you're seeing on the screen is kind of what they sent out to us to, there's where the deck super sub, the square footage, when the year built, total length, the scour. So what we ended up having to do on the right side at the top where the arrow is, it says the technical concurrence, the approved by management, and then committed. That means that that project is going to be funded and is ready to go out the door for PS&E. But you can see there on the top left, though, there's a blank there for the year. This structure here actually didn't get pulled out through the BMS, but I'm hoping that Dan can help us with the grant program, and that's where this one got added. So we were able to add, as a district bridge engineer, we had to go through each one of these structures that it caused for a treatment. And then on the right side, we had to tell if we agreed with the treatment or if we proposed a different treatment. And that was kind of interesting. So the district that I'm currently over has over 1,200 bridges and culverts. And with being in the position for 3 months, I had to vet out all of these bridges that I know very little about. My entire career with consulting was always the large span, the complex structures, that type of thing. So in central office, it was putting out contracts for complex structures, that span over the Ohio and Canal rivers. So I didn't know about all of the smaller structures. So I had to spend a lot more time than other bridge engineers in vetting out whether or not the treatment was adequate or not. So what I found interesting earlier, that Texas, you guys, I think were saying that $80 a square foot for structure replacement. I would love, if you look at this, I'm paying $680 a square foot in West Virginia. So, yeah, that was an eye opener. So this is the treatments that they gave us and the cost per deck square foot that we had to use, and whether we agreed or disagreed with what the treatment was. And then the benefit of, if you did a certain treatment, what your benefit, the life out of that, particular treatment would gain you. So why is it important to do the vetting? When they first sent this out, all the district bridge engineers, and Stephen, you're not allowed to tell anybody this, but we all got together behind the scenes from central office and was like, what are you going to do with all this information? How are you going to vet this out? And I'm like, I'm going to just assume that BMS knows what it's doing. Well, the more I dug into it, I realized, well, it doesn't, but I did realize that it has a lot of good information in there. However, with this one in particular, there were a few others that I'll talk about, but this one in particular was kind of interesting, that it kicks out a deck overlay in 2022 at $0, which was very odd. But then in 2028, it has a deck overlay, but actually it's not a good candidate for an LMC. So the software isn't quite there. So, this is going to be a full deck replacement. In the deck, you can see the condition state on the bottom left is pointed out as a 3. So again, the BMS has to be massaged, and I'm sure I'm not the only DOT that has that issue, and the data is not coming out perfect yet. One of the other ones that we saw a lot of, it was kick out a deck overlay. but it's really odd when you look at the structure and you've got a earth-filled concrete arch. It's kind of hard to put an concrete overlay on earth-filled arch, so that ends up being a replacement. That was another one that really kicked out pretty early on for us. So always providing good feedback to the central office with this. It has been beneficial to our BMS runs, and I think things are getting better. So most of you probably haven't met Steve, and this is his first time at the conference. I wanted to include his information here as a program manager, so if you guys need to get a hold of him. But that is my perspective of it from the district. So.
Okay, thank you, Chad. So I appreciate you gentlemen giving that as a little bit of a tee up. So I didn't really set the stage when we started, but the topic for this panel session is really supposed to be sort of tying the use of inspection data towards and asset management plans and systems towards doing preservation decision making. So I'm going to open the floor to some questions and whatnot, but I'll lead off with one of my own, which I'm kind of playing a little bit off of Graham's presentation. I'd like to know what you guys have in terms of strategies for incentivizing focus on preservation versus the traditional worst first in your programs, just at a high level. And, how does that play into it?
As you know, I don't work for Michigan DOT anymore. I'm a consultant, but I can give you a little information from some of the clients that we have, and they're local agencies. So the one thing I want to point out is that asset management isn't just for the DOTs anymore. A lot of local agencies are really getting into it. And, so we have some local agencies like Hillsborough County here that's building advanced bridge management systems. And I asked Dan about benefit cost analysis. And, the exciting thing to me is if you do advanced asset management, the benefit cost ratio for preservation is almost always better than rehab or replacement. And so that's really a cool thing. It can show the value of preservation. So that's just one example I could think of.
So as far as incentive, like GDOT, we do all our maintenance from the state level. So the districts are not involved on preservation, and we do try to communicate with the county and locals. We have created some kind of preservation work, letting them know that the worst first approach is not a good one. Like, we gotta make sure like we spend money wisely now to preserve it. And I like to give them an example of a car and doing a routine oil change, and the money you spend in 5 years if you do a routine maintenance on the car is a lot less than when you happen to change the transmission or engine. And that that kind of example kind of relates because all of us drive a car, so that's what we do. But as far as GDOT, we don't have any kind of incentive. Like, it's for us like trying to figure out like, hey, you know what, if we put more funds towards our preservation, that's a good thing in the long term.
All right, I'm going to supplement the question with, because of your answer, what's your performance measure for success? How do you determine that you're going the right direction?
What we do is we measure where we are currently. So as far as Georgia, based on the PowerPoint, like we got 79% of the bridges in a good condition, and 20% in a fair condition, and 0.6% in a poor condition. So we have a target, like internal target, saying, let's say as Georgia, we want to be like 80% in 5 years. And we have a BRM program, which uses deterioration curve to tell us like where the bridges would be in 5 years, 10 years. And we try to model it off of it, and we'll try to relocate the funding. And that's how we're monitoring and we're measuring our success. Like every year we run the analysis and see where we are.
I'm Cole Stump with the Alabama DOT. We're similar to you guys in Georgia. We don't really incentivize the areas or districts as far as preservation goes right now, but they're all pretty good at knowing they need to do that type thing. It's really just on us using the BMS to sort of illustrate, give them ideas on what they can do to achieve the performance measures that we set at the headquarters.
So West Virginia, they started, we have core maintenance that they do, like pulling ditches and things like that. So they actually did that with the bridge as well. So they're starting that up with the core maintenance with bridge preservation activities, which would be sealing decks, washing bridges yearly, and that all gets reported back. I think they're setting it up as similar as they did before, is that the public will be able to see it, and they'll be able to see what bridges are slated for 2022, 2023, so they'll know which bridges should be getting different treatments. And that was part of why I did the presentation that I did, because with that vetting tool that they have, I can query that and get with my bridge repair maintenance group. And I gave them a list. Here's what is expected of you in 2022 out of the BMS. And management is looking at it, and they will be coming and asking questions. If these structures don't have the deck sealed, if they don't have these treatments that we're doing in-house done, unfortunately, there'll be ramifications where they'll be writing people up, all those fun types of things. But they're serious about the preservation, and they understand it. So that's why that vetting tool that that we're using is so important, and they understand that. So they're backing us on it, but they're also counting us accountable on it, as well as the public being able to see the core maintenance of washing the bridges and things of that nature.
Michael, you asked about how do you measure success? And my favorite thing, and anybody who knows me probably heard this before, is when I was at Michigan DOT to ask the districts how many bridges dropped into pour last year. And they took it serious, and every one of them was expected to know that answer. Our North District would get it, had gotten it down to 0 and held it to 0 for many years. And to do that, you have to identify which of those 5s are going to approach being a 4 and hit them before they can get there. Hopefully with preservation.
Good point. All right, so now I'm going to open it to the floor if other folks have some questions.
Robbie, I'm still trying to process how you're over 70% good condition. Have you tracked that? Did that start lower and you got it up? I mean, that is a crazy high percentage.
Yep, that is correct. We are tracking it for the last 6 years, and there has been several changes we did. Like, we've been doing polymer overlay for the last 15, 20 years, something like that, and then we were not getting, because let's say back in 2016, I don't know the number on top of my head, our percentage of good bridges were close to 50%, somewhere around there, and we were doing all this work, preservation work, like we were painting the bridges, we were putting polymer overlay, replacing the joints. But what has happened was the inspector were going out there, and then they were not giving us credit for the polymer overlay, and they didn't know better, because we should have taught them, saying, hey, you know what, we got the polymer overlay, now it seals the deck, and their logic was we can't see anything on the deck, it's covered, so how are we going to credit it because we can't see it? And we made a rule saying if it is polymer overlaid and you don't see any kind of spall or anything, that needs to be 7. And when we go out there and do the spall repairs and all this kind of thing, they think it's still a spall repair. It's no good, then better. When it was originally built, so it was part of us educating them, and 70% is crazy high, Graham, and I'm still trying to process that, and we made some change. We've been training our inspector more frequently now. We have a monthly meeting with inspectors, answering their questions. So we're just trying to process that, and also part of the funding, we moved a lot of funding towards preservation. So we're putting $20 million for polymer overlay, focusing on all the major interstate bridges, so that's how.
I was going to let somebody else ask a question, but this is for Robbie too. It has to do with your painting program. Are you guys considering doing more than just total removals? Are you considering doing spot painting, zone painting, overcoating in that program, or is it basically once it gets to this position, it gets programmed into a repainting program?
I understand. We used to do that. We used to do a spot painting for bearing and 5 feet from the bearing end. What we found out was, the cost, some, for the containment system and mobilization and everything, it was not effective. So we say, we might as well go ahead and, paint the whole thing. And we try to lump 10 different bridges for painting, group them together, so that way we get a better price. So we're moving away for spot painting.
This is a question for everyone, and then also for Graham, I guess. Graham mentioned that you don't want to take the largest structures only and game the system. However, a lot of the large structures are also much more expensive than a typical bridge to replace. Do any of these states take a large structure set aside, if you will, where you isolate some of those critical or larger structures, and that way you can look at the rest of your inventory separate from that?
When we do FHWA bridge management system workshop, so we've traveled to, about 20, 25 states now. And my experience with the states is that a lot of them do have, they might call it a signature bridge program, a large bridge program, or a complex bridge program, or a border state bridge program. But I'm saying a lot of states do have identified that and have that large bridge program.
Yeah, with Georgia, we have couple of cable stayed bridges, and we treat them separately. We inspect them. We have a separate preservation program for that. Like I saw Stephen had the program for those bridges. We try to have something similar to that.
We absolutely do that in Alabama. It's probably 15 to 20 of them. We call them mega bridges. Couple that are like 6 miles long, 8 miles long. And we definitely separate those out and take a more proactive approach to it, paint it regularly, look at strengthening old trusses, stuff like that. So, yeah, they're definitely treated separately.
Unfortunately, we have over 25 signature bridges, and New River Gorge being one of them, and we do not have, that is one of the things that management needs to look at. We need to have a large span, complex, set aside money and maintenance program. Like it's unfortunate, but no, we do not.
And it's been a number of years since I left Virginia, but they do have a program of 25 special structures, which includes movables, tunnels, and large complex structures. And they've got 30-year look-aheads for all of those structures. I don't know that they've got separate funding. Do they? Okay. So they've got those as a carve-out, just as you're explaining. So thanks, guys.
This is for Chad. You've done a lot of vetting of BMS types decisions, and that's pretty interesting to me, where I used to be at NCDOT. So with where your system is right now, you've looked at a lot of projects the system's recommending. Do you have any opinions on what types of projects the system's really good with? Where generally you're looking at it and saying, yeah, it's getting this right. And is there a type of project where you think it needs improvement the most?
To say it's doing it right, it appears the overlay sometimes is where it's kind of can be spot on or really miss. We do have in the past have had an overlay project, program, and we had a full clean and paint program. And both of those, the overlay is still staying there, but what I saw the most of was like the clean and paint program literally like just really dropped off. And some of you may know Bill Murray was here and he's attended a few of these, and he had that program where he programmed clean and paint projects, and he had set like $8 million, and that kind of went by the wayside. So that's kind of concerning. The good thing about what they've done is we can query this thing and pull it out by treatment and by year and really get into the weeds of it. But I would say those two there, and I'm an advocate of overlays and doing LMCs, but it also at this point is kicking out things that should never have an LMC with a deck of a rating of a 3 or an concrete arch. And I think they're building that into the system. But it's those learning curves right now. But as far as the rehab, I think it's doing a good job. It kicks out. It doesn't kick out the exact treatment. Sometimes it'll just say it's like MCSE or something that kicks out, and then we look at it and say, okay, well, it has to be the superstructure is going to need X number of dollars based on deck square foot, and then the substructure unit. It'll just kick out, but the numbers is really close. So for the most part, I would say it's 80% effective as far as just looking at it and saying, let's go with it. But as time goes on, it's going to get better. I'm trying to keep a positive outlook on it. A lot of people are negative against it, saying, as before, people reprogram things and priorities would go down the list. But those are the key components that I see right now that needs tweaked a little bit more.
I just have one question. this is the struggle that I have with the bridge management systems. And I kind of ran that in North Dakota. I worked on it for a few years, and we know that the preservation treatments, even the simple cyclical type, washing, flushing, sealing, it's hard to quantify that treatment or that work into something and put it into a bridge management system and have that, recognize that as being something positive. Doesn't necessarily change the condition of that, you seal a duct, it doesn't really change the condition. We know that it slows deterioration. We know that, in our minds, and it makes sense, but to get that information into the system and have it recognize and use that as a benefit is one of the struggles that I always had dealt with. And do you have any thoughts or ways that how do you solve that?
I'll leave it up to Mont McDonald to figure that out. I think it's built in there. I actually think that they have addressed that. I was in a couple, and it's been quite a few years ago, sat in a couple meetings, and those types of things were being built in to shift that deterioration curve out. So I think the way that they have it set up, I think it's going to be accounted for, but we have to make sure that when we do it, that it gets back in the system so the system can say, okay, you get.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.